Okay, so for today's presentation, I'm going to cover a few things in order. Um, Job search preparation, because it doesn't just happen automatically. We want to prepare for it, much like preparing for anything, be it grad school or whatnot. Getting our resume together as part of that preparation, and then interview strategies. So we're going to look at some particulars with that. Okay, job search preparation. So specifically, we're going to speak about getting started. How do we begin? Assessing your interests and your skills, evaluating the industry. Many of you have already done this as you've gone along, but just making sure we're really clear about the direction we're going. How hiring occurs, because it might be a little bit different than what you're thinking, and where to apply. What's the best way? What's the kind of the fastest way to go about it? So getting started, the days of just simply having any kind of generic resume once you complete, university and sending it out and getting a job, I think those have been done for a while. That's gone. It really comes down to much more, and really even before that, before you start getting into the workforce, I think it's assessing what are your values, interests, skills, passions, and goals, right? I know you kind of have some goals in terms of you're graduated, here's what you want to go into, but it's a little bit bigger than that. So our values. The values might be, quite honestly, that at a certain point you want to get married and have a family, you want to have kids. Other people don't want to do either of those two things. They want to really focus on a career, maybe a private practice, something along those lines. So it's not a right or wrong, but it's really being clear in your mind about the direction you ultimately want to go. And maybe that's on hold, right? Having a family, getting married, something like that is in the future. Right now, you just want to focus on your career and getting it started, but eventually you'll switch gears. Also, some people it's financial security. They want to know that they're going to make enough money, and that's their big focus. Other people, maybe it's kind of a work-life balance. Maybe they want to try and go work for a university, maybe not make as much money as they could in the private sector, but feel like they have some security. So these things are not right or wrong. They're just really about assessing what's going to work for you, what's important in your life above and beyond just your job. So career goals, um, keeping in mind that your very first job may not be your ultimate, right? If we think about it in terms of a career trajectory, where do we want to end up, right? What's the ultimate goal? So people who get there, what do they have to do in the meantime? What are the steps that need to be taken? Where are the places that we would need to work or intern? What might be some of the things that we have to take place to eventually get there? What is our goal? Then we're going to discuss in a little bit your resume as well in more depth. Um, Basically, dusting it off. When's the last time that we looked at it? Is it up to speed or has it been a few years? How does it stack up compared to other people? Because again, we're not just going to send out kind of generic resumes. They need to be more specific. So how does hiring occur? Seems kind of obvious, right? They're advertised positions and linked on LinkedIn, Indeed, and such, Handshake. And those are very real. Then there's recruitment. So recruiters, that's their job. That's how they get paid, is to find the right people, look through the resumes, and do brief interviews so they can place people. So recruiters, that's what they do, and then they report back to managers. So that's also legitimate to go through a recruiter. Um, then unadvertised opportunities. So that's really the big one that I want to kind of talk about, which is networking. So networking is, for some people, they automatically do it. They don't even think about it as networking. Um, they're just very extroverted and they know everyone and they constantly are speaking with people and going to lunch with people if it wasn't COVID. And for people like that, they never really have to look for a job because they have so many contacts, jobs come to them. But the majority of people need to kind of make an effort in terms of contacting people. So networking can be as basic as just kind of letting your friends and former colleagues know that you're graduating, that you've graduated, that you're ready to take the next step, and here's what you're looking for. It could be reaching out to some old classmates that you worked on a group project with and just kind of saying, "Hey, where are you at in the process? I just graduated. Here's what I'm looking for. Are you working anywhere? Do you like it?" Um, Not really hounding anyone. We're not doing that, but we're just kind of getting in touch with people. Also, professional organizations. That's a great way to be around like-minded people. It also looks good on a resume, of course, to be a part of professional organizations, go to events, and then volunteering. So volunteering, again, gets you around like-minded people, but it also, besides looks good on a resume, it's you get around people who have the same ideas that you do, because not that anybody can go to school and get a degree, because that's not the case, but going above and beyond to volunteer really does show that you're very interested in your profession. Then recruiters, of course, reaching out to recruiters, having them reach out to you and work with them in terms of where you might want to work. And social media, LinkedIn and Facebook. Now, I'm not sure if my understanding is y'all don't really typically use LinkedIn as much, but LinkedIn's a really a good tool. So it's worth investigating because what people want unknowingly is that oftentimes the recruiters and even just anybody hiring managers like to look on LinkedIn if for no other reason they see a picture of who you are and they can put a name to a face. And there's so much more available there as far as space to write about yourself and your passions, kind of the about section as to why you got into this profession. And also in terms of it has all the basic aspects of your resume as well. Um, Education, employment, those sorts of things. Then, of course, and I should back up, networking, I mean, back up, 85% of jobs roughly come through networking. Some will say 90, 80 to 90, it's somewhere in there. So if you know somebody and you do an informational interview, maybe you've reached out to somebody who's been in the workforce for 5, 6, 10 years, and you reach out through LinkedIn to do an informational interview and ask them, how did you get into the business? How long have you been doing this? Where else have you worked? What has been your experience? What's it like to work with that with particular group or that company or that university? And just get the inside scoop. Then hopefully throughout the conversation there's a chance that they might say, well, when you're looking or you're ready, send me your resume because I know some people. And if that's the case, that's hiring managers and recruiters, that's really what they want. They want somebody to say, hey, I know this person, here's their resume, because it makes their job a lot easier. So like I said, roughly 85% of jobs come through networking. At the same time, we're not going to ignore everything else. We're still going to apply through any jobs posted on Handshake, LinkedIn, Indeed, anything like that. We're still going to apply in that manner. Okay, looking at resume and CV. So CV is really there's a lot to a CV, but it's also basic in that you just fill out all the information, everything that's asked for. So I have a template for a CV. So in case CVs are more academic, research based, scientific, if you're going to go work at a university, something like that. So if you are being requested to fill out a CV and submit it, um, let me know. And actually in the chat, I can post the template from UTD for a CV. It's what I use to get together my CV. But as far as the business world, they're asking for a resume. So that's really completely different. So as a result, That's what I'm going to focus on. So resume writing. So we're going to look at the basics and accomplishment statements. What does that look like? What do we need to put in a resume? And then star statements is kind of a way to guide us how to write in a resume, but also in an interview, really, how to speak, how we can be clear and concise. So, writing a resume, this is a specific skill set. And I say that because many people go and they receive their degree, and then it's time to um, start applying for jobs. They're writing a resume, and they struggle with it. And it's not that a resume is rocket science. It's not. It's just not something that people typically work on, right? It's not people's area of expertise. So that's why it becomes difficult. So what I would say is don't do it alone. You want to reach out, have people look at it. That's part of what we do in the Career Center. We've got multiple ways that you can accomplish this. But it's once you start communicating with people on resumes, it gets a lot easier compared to just being at home and trying to figure out what on earth am I putting, as a bullet point right here. But that's part of what we'll discuss right now. So exactly what is it? Sounds like a strange question, but really, it's not like a CV that contains everything. A resume is brief. It's really just a marketing tool. It's a way to get your foot in the door. So think about it this way. I know when I've done hiring in the past, I might get 2 or 300 resumes in. Well, unknowingly or unconsciously, really what I'm trying to do is put as many in the no pile as possible because I can't look through all of them. So I'm weeding people out pretty quick and easy. Your goal is to stay in the yes pile, to just get your foot in the door, to make me say, I want to know more about this person. Their resume looks like they've got what I'm looking for. I need to do an interview over the phone, right? So as a result, your resume is just kind of a brief summary of your knowledge and skills and abilities. It's not everything. It's not everything that you've ever done or all your qualifications. It's just enough to kind of start the conversation. Also, resumes are subjective. So there's not a rule book that says the do's and don'ts of writing a resume. It's not like accounting, right? Um, so as a result, you can ask 5 people and they can have 5 different opinions. So the biggest thing with that I would say is you don't have to take their advice or everyone's advice. Also, if someone's giving you advice about your resume, ask them, why are they making that recommendation? Because if you meet with me and I say, I would suggest changing this aspect, and you ask me why, I should have a reason why, not just why I don't know. That's what I think. There should be a specific reason why we're going to tailor it in this fashion. So keeping in mind, resumes are subjective. There are people, you might have a parent who's vice president in a big corporation who last did his or her resume 20 years ago and said, here, do it exactly like this. This is what I like to see. And it's not that that's wrong, but that's probably not the latest, right? It's not up to date. And so unless you're applying with that person, it may not be a good resume. So point is, reach out, have some people look at what you've done. So getting started, we're going to first create a master resume. We're going to have everything on it, right? So even that first job you had at Chick-fil-A, anything, you're going to put it on there because at a certain point as you're applying with your resume, different companies might ask you to put all this additional information on their website, on their portal. And it's nice to know, what are those dates? Where was I at? It also allows you to then take that resume and copy it, and that becomes your specific resume for a specific job. So essentially, your resume, this master resume, is like a living, evolving document. And as you hit milestones and you do different things, whether it's completing an internship, graduating, whatever it is, if you can go back to that master resume, and put in a few bullet points, it's going to be a lot easier when the time comes to apply, as opposed to thinking back to say, now what did I do there? And what was that project? And how many people was I over? It's just a lot easier to do it as you go. So, keeping in mind is that we're talking all about resumes here and all the work that you will put in to a resume to kind of, because resumes are technical writing. You're not putting a ton of information, but each bullet point is important. So we're putting a lot of effort into them. But keeping in mind recruiters, hiring managers, again, they have a stack of them to look through. So they might spend 30 seconds is pretty generous, really more like 10 seconds. So if we keep that in mind, that we're going to do all this work, but knowing they're going to glance through it, that's also going to help guide us into how we're going to put information in. It's about 1 to 2 pages, depending on your work experience. And for a business resume, it's best, especially with automatic tracking systems on computers, to have just a white Microsoft document that you type on, black ink. That's it. No gray tones, no colors, nothing fancy. Now, I know that's different if you have friends that are in creative fields, A Tech or A&H, they might have colorful resumes and all kinds of fonts and such. Well, that's industry standard for them. But as far as a standard business resume, it's very basic. And again, it's just enough to get your foot in the door. So let's look at a few different types, 3 different types to be exact, and look at the pros and cons to each type. So chronological, this is the most common. This is what you're used to seeing. That's what employers are used to seeing. It focuses on your work history and it's easy to read because that's what we're used to looking at. And part of the name of the game to stay in the yes stack and not the no pile is to make it easy. If people are fighting with your resume, it's too hard to read, there's too much information or not enough, or it's organized in a strange way, it makes people irritated because they've got so many to go through. So you get pushed aside. Well, we don't want to do that. So chronological, essentially, it's my favorite because it's so common. It makes it easy. But the cons to it, if there are frequent job changes, it's going to highlight that. If there are gaps in employment, sometimes people pause their career, have a family for a couple of years, a few years, and then you kind of have to explain, well, where have you been? What have you done? And sometimes people lack the related experience, so they're new to the profession. So that's when we look at a lot of academic projects and classes and different things that you've learned that can fill in where the work experience is lacking. Then we have a functional resume. So it emphasizes skills rather than employment history, and it can disguise those gaps in work history. But again, it's less straightforward and it can appear incomplete because, again, people are going to be searching for, well, what's the order of the places that they worked and when did they work there? But the positive is it's emphasizing functionality. So sometimes people will have a combination of the two, highlighting their relevant skills and accomplishments, not focusing on employment history. But again, it can be a bit confusing. It's you have to really be creative to make this work, and it may not accurately display your length of experience somewhere. So again, this is why we really want to have somebody kind of look it over before you send it out. So let's look at some of the sections. You also see on the right the type of resumes I was talking about that we, as business resumes, that we would not put out. The one on the far right with the colors looks great. It's just not standard business. And the one in the next one is pretty good. It's a little bit different, but it's got those shades of colors, right? So even though that looks good, I still would recommend just a standard resume. So let's look at these sections and kind of have an overview of what's there. So the header, it's right at the top. It's our name. It's some contact information. It's real basic. So our phone number, an email account that's professional, not a UTD email because that goes away pretty quickly after graduation. So one that maybe you're just going to have for employment, perhaps something that's really, easy to read. Then LinkedIn, because again, there's a lot of employers, they will take that LinkedIn address, they go straight to it because they want to see who's this Mary Butler and read a little bit and then look over the resume. Other people don't look at LinkedIn. Other people would go over maybe a cover letter or something like that first. Point is, we really don't know what that hiring manager or recruiter is going to do, but we are going to try and make it easy. Say, here's my email, here's my phone number, here's my LinkedIn. It's all right there. Then sometimes people will put a profile summary. So it's not something that you have to do. I don't even know percentage-wise how many people do it, probably less than 50%, but it's a way of putting underneath your header, your name, just some little technically written uh, small paragraph describing you and what you do. Essentially, what you bring to the table, your specialty, your skills, achievements, years of experience. So let's look at an example that you could take the tone of. So here's a pretty good example in that this person is a highly motivated such and such with over so many years of experience in this industry. They have advanced knowledge of certain aspects, kind of their specialty, so to speak. Maybe they're good at using particular software or note taking or whatever it might be within the industry. And then if there's any kind of numbers or percentages, right? If there's success rates, anything like that, that you can incorporate, or maybe a certain number of client facing hours to date, right? Something that's specific. So if that was the case, and I know that I've seen, throw out a number, 200 patients, 200 clients. I'm not going to say I've seen a lot. I'm going to say over 200 or over 300 or over 600 or whatever it is. That's more specific. So we want to be specific, and this summary is our way of kind of bragging about ourselves, because that's what it is. And it's a way for me or for the hiring manager to read and say, okay, in this case, this Mary Butler sounds interesting. Let's look at the rest of the resume. So again, you don't have to have a profile summary at the top, but if you wanted to, this is a pretty good example. Then experience. So you're going to have your job title and the company and the dates that you were employed, and then a few bullet points perhaps under each. Maybe it's one bullet point, 2, 3, 4, depends. But the point is that the top bullet point for any given job is going to be the best bullet point. So from the top down, right? It's best at the top. They might all be good, but if we think about it again in terms of the hiring manager or the recruiter is going to glance over this, 10 seconds, and they're looking for words that catch their attention. So the most relevant experience at the top is going to catch their attention before the ones further down. Accomplished statements, essentially not job descriptions. So not it was my job duty to do such and such. It's here's what I did. Here's what I accomplished. That's a different way to write it. The STAR formula. So this is a way to kind of help you with those accomplishment statements, with those bullet points. There are some people, and you can also use it in interviews. So I'll talk about it in a bit for that as well. Essentially, the way I see a STAR technique is a way to take people who talk too much or write too much and have them boil it down, or people who don't speak enough or don't write enough to have them give you what's needed. So in this very simplistic example, the situation is that this individual came home and they noticed their flowers were wilted. So they essentially knew they had to bring them back to life. They got some water, they got some fertilizer, put them out in the sun, and as a result, they came back to life. So it's saying, here was the situation, here's what I did, and the end result was good, right? So that's what we can kind of use to guide our statements, that we're ending it on a positive note, right? That's what we're showcasing. So here would be an example of a statement: coordinated and supervised, so many teams consisting of this many people successfully completed this project within a certain time frame, reduced costs by 15%. Again, if we have numbers to put in, percentages, that's great. Oftentimes when many people don't, and that's okay, but if you have them, you definitely want to include them. Volunteer and academic experience. So this is important because it's also showing transferable skills. And like I said before, volunteering is going to look good on a resume. It's going to help us meet people, but it's going to really highlight how important this is to us. And academic clubs, professional organizations, that's again going to be really, it's going to look good. It's going to show, it's kind of like going above and beyond, essentially. And we're going to still utilize the STAR formula to talk about those accomplishments. Education, right now, your education would probably be at the top, maybe right under your the header if you don't have a profile summary. And if you, let's just say, were to be graduating May of 2021, you would just put May 2021. We know that that's coming. It's just something to showcase real easily. What degree did you get? What's the date? What is it? And then the question comes up sometimes about GPA. Should I put a GPA? The way I always view GPA is, if you have a strong GPA that you're proud of, that's really considered strong for your group, then put it down. If you think it's kind of weak, then don't put it down. Don't highlight it, because that's really the gist of a resume, is we're bringing out the good and not really talking as much about the not so good. Certifications and trainings. So of course, these are good as well. Anything that you might get trained on, any continuing education, anything like that, which is also why continuing to add to your master resume is a good idea, because once you go to apply for a new job down the road, you'll have forgotten about some of the trainings that you went through, potentially. And that's a way of keeping it up to date. Awards. So awards also, they're great because they highlight the fact that you were given something that the majority of people did not get. Now, we want to be careful with awards. We want to also speak about them, preferably if you can say exactly what the award is. Because if you put in a resume, and I often see this, I won the NTAH award. Now, what is the NTAH award? Well, I don't know, because I made it up. But the point is, nobody knows what that award is except probably you. Unless you're going to win the Nobel Prize, we're going to need to know, what is that award? What was it for? What does it mean? Okay, so just kind of list it out. Tell us a little bit about it. Not a ton, but just a little bit. So with your master resume complete, again, this is when we can take it and customize and apply to jobs. So with that resume complete, make a copy. We want to apply to ABC company. So we copy it, we call it ABC resume, and then we start to eliminate probably some different aspects like that first job at Chick-fil-A, because now you have enough professional experience, academic experience, and you're not going to have a super long resume. So some of that goes away because you're not going to apply with that. As an example, before becoming a therapist, I was a fire protection engineer for 18 years. So that's not even on my resume anymore. It's on my master resume, but when if I'm applying for jobs as a therapist, as a career counselor, it's not on there because it's no longer relevant. So what do we use as our guide for these resumes that are specific? Well, we use the job listing. When we read that job listing, they're telling us, Hopefully, more than likely. Sometimes they're vague, but a lot of times they will have requirements and they'll say, here's what we want in a candidate. So whatever it is that they're saying, their preferred, what they prefer or what they require, if I was looking at that job posting and your resume right in front of me, I would say, where are those bullet points in your resume? Where can I read about them? And it's not going to be enough to just say, well, I didn't put it down, but I have done them. We want to read about them because the only thing that that hiring manager or recruiter or automatic tracking system knows is what they read initially. So again, you're going to tailor that resume to a specific job listing. Now, the good news is if you're not just going off into different circles to try and get any job, if everything you're applying for is within the same realm, right? Then it makes it easier. It's not that much different from job post to job post. But it can vary because some jobs, they've had some encounters with employees that they weren't happy with. And so it'll really highlight that in the job posting. So you want to be able to acknowledge it. So I have this resume editor at UT Dallas edu. So we've got a couple different ways if you wanted somebody to review your resume. This is having somebody in our department review it grammatically, just to kind of look it over, make sure it seems pretty good. And that's done through email. Now, if you wanted to do really the next step and the step that's necessary when it comes to, applying for a specific job, that's when you really want to sit down with somebody, have a virtual appointment. That's part of what I do. The other career consultants do it as well. But when you meet with me, I'm not going to do it through an email. We're going to do it on an appointment, and we're going to talk about it and look at exactly what all these bullet points are. And if they're lacking, talk about how we can change them. So it's more of a discussion at that point. Interview strategies. So let's look at what are our strategies. So how are we going to go about this? So our attire, I know we have COVID and we're doing virtual more than likely, but that's still, there's some things to talk about with it. Our preparation, really, we've been preparing all along, each one of these steps, the search, the resume, we're still preparing for this interview. And then what to expect, what is going to take place. So first of all, it starts with knowing the organization. Now, if you're applying to a few different positions, 3 different companies, 3 different jobs, something like that, you might tell your friends, I've got 3 interviews this week. Well, the employer, any one of them that's interviewing you, doesn't view it as you having 3 interviews. They view it as they have an interview with this person to see if you are the correct candidate for this job. So knowing exactly what they do is important. Getting on their website and seeing essentially the tone of their website, the tenor of what it is that they do. Every company can change a little bit, right? There's little idiosyncrasies. Then also understanding the job, right? Exactly what that job is, exactly what that job posting is. And this is when it really helps if you've had informational interviews or through networking, somebody that's already there, because you can speak to that in the interview and say, yes, I've already spoken with Joe. He's informed me that these are the things that you do, right? And this is what takes place every Friday. And, I'm acutely aware, and it sounds great. So they know that you really know what you're getting into. Then practice. So this is a part that a lot of people unfortunately get kind of backwards, meaning they'll come to me and say, well, I figured I should make an appointment to maybe do a mock interview and practice because I went on a job interview and I don't think it went very well. I think, oh, you're right. That was backwards because it can be hard to get an interview, and you've done a lot of work applying and posting information in the portal or whatnot to then feel like you blew it. We don't want to blow it then. So minimum, just speaking with somebody about some of your qualifications, a friend, coworker, whomever. But ideally, doing a mock interview is the way to go. We've also have on our website, we have interview streams, so it's a way to record yourself. That can help. But sometimes the thoughts we have in our head about how great we are and speaking about our experience, sometimes when we go to speak about them in the real world, it doesn't come out as well. So having a little bit of time, just a minor amount of time to practice, and then if you blow that, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Um, and if you didn't need the practice because you're just great at interviewing, well, that's a wonderful skill, and good. Then you're good to go. So practicing, I think, is can be key. So items to have on hand during the interview. Again, you could whether it's in person or virtual, it's really the same, but minor differences. But what I would say is you're probably going to first have a virtual interview, a virtual phone call, and I would have my resume printed out. Even though you wrote it and probably spent way too long looking at it to make all these changes, sometimes we get nervous on an interview and we blank and we can't remember the name of something or what we did or the date. So there it is in front of you. Having a glass of water on hand, bottled water, whatever it might be, because we might get nervous and have cotton mouth, and then we're focused on that. So we don't want that to be the case. Some paper, pencil, if we needed to write anything down, anything that came to mind. Also, being in a quiet space for the interview, good background if we're going to have cameras on, if it's Skype, fully charged phone, computer, all those things. We're ready to go. We're not running in at the last minute to do an interview and then try and have it all together. So we're planning ahead, right? Interview attire. So I know we're virtual, more than likely, but employers still want to see you dressed up and dressed professionally. And actually, what I've heard of recently is there have been some employers that will, and I think this is rude. I don't really like it, but it's taken place. They will ask you to stand up to see if you're wearing pants. Should be irrelevant, but I guess in their mind they're thinking, well, if you can't fully prepare for the interview, then we're not interested. I'm not sure. All I know is if tomorrow, if I was going on a job interview and it was virtually, besides my tie and my jacket, I would make sure I had on pants and shoes or skirt or whatever it is that you need to have on. And I suppose it also, dressing up, it makes you feel more professional, right? More competent. It's not the same if you're wearing shorts and flip-flops. So just completely dressed professionally. And if you're unsure how professional, um, it's better to overdress than underdress. You'd rather show up with as a male with a tie and a jacket, a suit, and have people interviewing you showing up in casual clothes and golf shirts. That's fine. It's better to do that than the other way around. And no one's going to really fault you for being really dressed up. So, types of interview questions, credentials, experience, they want to verify what you've done. And I know some people will say, well, it's all right there. Why are they asking me? Well, they just really, again, this is resume is a marketing tool to get your foot in the door. They want you to expand upon it, talk about it. Really great interviewers will listen to what you have to say and ask more questions based on that, as opposed to having just a set number of questions. So they just kind of want to get your take on it, hear how maybe passionate you were about this experience. So it's not always what we say, it's how we're saying it that really conveys a strong message. They might have some technical questions for you as well, just to kind of gauge where you're at. Opinion questions. So these, again, this is part of what I think is good about practicing. We have to be careful with opinions because we want to be middle of the road. If we have a really strong opinion one way, well, what if who I'm interviewing with has the opposite opinion? Now we're not on the same page. So kind of being careful with that. Behavioral questions, we'll look at a few examples here in a second. And then brain teaser questions, just off the wall, strange questions that people will come up with to ask you, just to kind of see how do you react? How do you handle this? What's your personality type? as opposed to thinking, well, that's a dumb question. Why are you asking me that question? So the best answers as we go into the examples are, for a question, personal, they're relevant to your field, and they're specific. Again, we're not going to say we've seen a lot of clients, we're going to say numbers. We're not going to say we've got a lot of experience, we're going to list it out. And our experiences, ideally, in our examples, are relevant to what we do now as a professional, not what we've done in the past. STAR method again, we can use that to guide us. Um, and you could really call it the SAR, SAR. So what was taking place? When did it happen? What actions did you take? What tools did you use? How did it work? And then what was the end result, which we're going to end on a positive note. So here are some kind of basic, typical kind of questions that they could ask. Tell us about a time you disagreed with your boss. Well, obviously, this is not a time we're going to talk about how she was an idiot and didn't know what she was doing and all that sort of thing. We're going to remain PC and talk about the disagreement and how we met and spoke about it and came to an understanding and how it worked out well in the end. Tell us about a time you had to work with a group to achieve a goal. Same thing. There can be group dynamics that are difficult. Well, how did you work with that group? Because you might be working with a team. Describe a time you were given criticism. How did you handle it? So same thing. Then your greatest, tell us about your greatest strengths, or tell us about your greatest weaknesses. So there's kind of a template for that. Again, we're bragging about ourselves with our strengths and weaknesses. So worth practicing. The general idea with the weakness is we're going to tell them something that we're aware of, and then what we've done to overcome that weakness. So in the end, it's really not a weakness. So it's kind of a foolish question in that regard, but it's pretty common. So being able to talk about that and what you've done to overcome it is really the end result that we're looking for. Okay. So let me turn off this and see if there are any questions in the chat, or we can take yourself off mute. Okay. So I'm seeing, whoa, quite a bit. Okay, that's the transcript, sorry. I thought that is a long question. Okay, here we go. Do you recommend putting a photo on your resume? Good question. No, do not put a photo on your resume. It's some companies. I think they won't even look at the resume then. You would think, well, what's the difference? It's on LinkedIn. Just a technicality. So to be clear, no photo on a resume. Definitely a photo on LinkedIn. You're going to get a lot more hits with a photo on LinkedIn. Good question though. When is it appropriate to ask about salary negotiations, the timing of it? Well, first you're trying to, and that's a good question, learn about the job. Are you a good fit for this position? Are they a good fit for you? And kind of get closer to getting an offer. You should have an idea going into it of the salary range that you're worth and the salary range that they're probably willing to pay if you are doing, looking on Glassdoor, doing informational interviews and such. So I don't really ask about salary as much as they will typically ask. And then I will respond with, well, I'm anxious to learn more about your company by chance, and know more about that, maybe the benefits that are involved. Or I'm anxious to, I'd like to learn about your salary range. Do you happen to have a range that you're working with, a budget that you're working with? And if they can answer that, which is great, they might say, yes, our salary is for this position, I'm just going to make it up, 75 to 100,000. You can say, well, that's great. I'm comfortable with that. Essentially, what you're trying to do is not give a number, right? So since you're applying there, you have an idea of what the range should be. So it's not something I'm bringing up. Good questions. Any other thoughts or questions? You can take yourself off mute or put them in the chat if you'd like. I'm not seeing any more questions. Let me scroll down. Nope. So nothing else. I covered everything, or you just kind of brain dead because it's the end of the day and you're done. Well, okay, looks like somebody else is typing. No more questions now. Okay, great. Well, that's all I really have to present on. So I will stick around and see if anybody has any more. If not, definitely thank you for having me, and make an appointment if you need anything else for sure. Otherwise, thank you. Thanks for showing up.